Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 163 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where few come out who once go in.
And of that few, none escape unscathed. Folks, go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room, and we'll be right there. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, who is both fair and perilous. Gotta stop letting him write these someday.
I was going to say, you might want to start writing these yourself, Sean. Otherwise, you're going to just get it worse, I promise.
I know. Alan Sisto.
All right. Well, be sure to check your evil at the front door. That makes me think of an Oingo Boingo song, though.
Yeah.
Leave your evil something at the door.
It's a good man's party. Leave
It's
your
a good
evil
man's
at the
party.
door.
I love that. That's great.
It's kind of
Oh,
corny,
man.
but, you know,
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Well, we're corny people.
No, man, I've checked my evil. It's right where I left it, deep in my heart.
There you go.
But enough about my moral bankruptcy. Let's get on with our latest installment of This Week in Tolkien History.
I'm glad we're not even addressing my moral bankruptcy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, we'll just skip right past yours and talk about mine.
Just go right on past it. Thank you.
Yeah, the legends of your moral bankruptcy have been told 1,000 times.
Wow. It just gets worse.
Let's just get to mine.
Let's move on to This Week in Tolkien History, shall we, Sean?
Let's do that. Well, folks, this episode is coming out on April 19th. And there's some fun stuff to recognize this week in Tolkien history. And I'm going to start with one of our favorite letters.
Ooh.
No, it's not letter number 131 to Milton Waldman. This time I'm actually talking about letter number 144 to Naomi Mitchison.
Yeah.
Naomi Mitchison was a writer who studied at Oxford. She published some poetry in the Oxford Poetry Annual Publication in a few different years, including 1915, where she was published alongside the professor's infamous poem Goblin Feet. Folks will remember that one.
Yeah.
But she became a fan and a friend of Tolkien's, and they corresponded with each other for many years. In 1954, she was actually reading some page proofs of the first 2 volumes of The Lord of the Rings, and she wrote to Tolkien with some questions about the book. Well, his response to her is what's published as letter number 144, and the date of that letter was April 25th, 1954.
Now, there is some great stuff in that letter, and it's a pretty long one. Tolkien answered questions about his invented languages, maps, Tom Bombadil, nothing definitive, of course, Entwives, Balrogs, again, nothing definitive on the wings, all the big enigmas of Middle-earth, it seems, but they remain enigmas, even to Tolkien.
And yet, I feel like we've gone back to that letter every time we've talked about one of those enigmas, haven't we?
I was going to say, we just talked about it recently with the Balrog wings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know we went to it for Tom Bombadil. So, it's a great source for some of those tough questions. Mm-hmm. There's even some hints about the Silmarillion in there. It's just a really fantastic letter. And I would say to everybody out there, if you haven't read it yet, well, this week is a good week to do so.
Indeed it is. And on that note, the next thing we want to call out this week in Tolkien history is the publication of the scholarly edition of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which was co-edited by Tolkien and E.V. Gordon and published by Oxford University Press on April 23rd, 1925. This isn't Tolkien's translation we're talking about. That was published after the professor's death by Christopher in 1975. In fact, that was the first of his publications of his father's works. Mm-hmm. The edition that came out this week in 1925 was in Middle English, so good luck with that. But it was published with a glossary and corrections on previous misreadings of the manuscript. It quickly became the most widely used edition of the poem for scholars in Middle English. But if you can't read Middle English, and I know I can't, why not celebrate the publication of Tolkien's important scholarly work by reading the translation? Now, I know you've heard us tell you before that it is available in a volume with his translations of both Pearl and Sir Orfeo. And if you don't have it, you can find a link to it in our library.
Well, now, I do want to say, don't be afraid of trying it in Middle English.
I know.
It's not Middle English. Right. Old English is a completely different language. It works completely differently. You look at Beowulf in Old English, and it's very hard to make anything of it.
You can maybe grasp a word here or there.
A word here and there. That's really it. But Middle English actually is close enough that with a really good glossary, you can usually do all right. So I wouldn't be too afraid of trying it. Now I haven't read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in Middle English, so I don't know about that.
I've
one
only read the translation. Right.
But like Chaucer and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and stuff.
True. That's probably the most recent thing I've read in Middle English. Yeah.
Yeah. But definitely, if you are intimidated by the Middle English, go out and get the Modern English translation by Tolkien because it is fantastic. And once again, now is really a good time to read that because, well, not only is it a good thing to celebrate this week, but there's also a movie adaptation coming out in just about a month, I think.
Really?
There's a film coming out. Yeah, there's a film coming out called The Green Knight. It's written and directed by a filmmaker named David Lowery, and it stars Dev Patel as Sir Gawain. It's coming out in the U.S. in May, and the trailer's been getting, well, I'd say it's been getting some attention in Tolkien fandom on Twitter and on Facebook. Now, I mean, of course, it's not an adaptation of Tolkien, of course, because this is a Middle English poem, but it's something that Tolkien was interested in, and so I think it's something that a lot of Tolkien fans are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
I, for one, am certainly interested in the movie, and I would imagine that the filmmakers probably at least looked at Tolkien's edition, probably read Tolkien's edition while they were developing it. I mean, it's Tolkien's work on that poem was pretty important, so I'm guessing they probably were at least familiar with it if they did their homework. But have you seen the trailer at all?
I have not. In fact, actually, it was only when I first saw the notes for this that I knew that there was a movie coming out on that.
Oh, really?
I kind of live under a rock when it comes to movies, so...
Well,
non-Pixar / Disney movies, that is.
Yeah, well, with kids, it is kind of hard to find time to go see movies for yourself, and this one is definitely not going to be for kids.
No, I can imagine it won't be.
I mean, you folks can see the trailer out on YouTube. In fact, we'll put a link to it in our show notes. But it certainly looks like a unique take on the story. I mean, it's kind of, it's one of those trailers like it's really moody, and there's a lot of like
world where a green knight stalks the countryside.
It's more like the music and stuff like that. Like it's really dark, and
nobody does those in a world trailers anymore. At least not seriously.
Yeah, well, nobody can do it anymore now that Don LaFontaine's gone. But
yeah, that's true.
He was kind of a legend in voiceover, wasn't he?
He absolutely was. A guy I would aspire to be, really, in that profession, no doubt.
Right. But no, I mean, it's a very dark looking film. It definitely looks kind of like there's a bit of a thriller aspect to it. I doubt it's going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I'm excited for it. I mean, it looks original. It looks pretty artistically done. And, there's always this, even if I don't end up liking it, it'll probably be the sort of thing, at least I hope, it'll introduce more people to the source material, and that's always a good thing. But it's definitely an update. That much is clear from the trailer. It's like a real stylistic update. They'll probably update it a bit thematically too, and that's where I'm kind of wondering if they're just going to kind of like, miss the core of the original, as we might say.
To quote Tom Shippey there, we'll be talking about that.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just kind of see where it goes.
Yeah. And, that is the thing. I mean, in the introduction to the translation, to Tolkien's translation that Christopher released 2 years after his father's death, Tolkien calls Sir Gawain and the Green Knight a romance, a fairy tale for adults full of life and color. And, of course, it has this really strong thread throughout of sort of the ideals of, Christian knighthood. Tolkien's own words, the rejection of unchastity and adulterous love.
Yeah, I mean, it's a medieval poem, so those are the kinds of themes you tend to find in medieval poetry. And it is kind of hard to see any of that from the trailer. It definitely...
Well, a movie that emphasized those themes wouldn't do very well in Hollywood.
Well,
here is a movie that rejects unchastity and adulterous love. It portrays the ideals of Christian knighthood. Come see this movie.
There are a few out there, but I would say this one definitely isn't full of life and color. It looks really dark, very muted color palette. But
all right.
I'm going in excited, and I'm prepared to be let down if possible, as I frequently am. But
as long as it isn't as terrible as that CG Beowulf from a few years back. I mean, really. I mean, I know it's a low bar, but
that is a low bar. But it does kind of look like it. Well, it looks like it's going to be better than that. So I don't want to compare it to that. It does look like it's going to be better than that. But
that was awful.
That CG Beowulf did do a lot of those things of like really trying to make it really dark and really intense and I didn't care for that one bit.
Neither did I. But like you said, this does make it a good time to read Tolkien's translation if you haven't already. So heartily recommend doing exactly that.
Very good.
Well, Sean, are we done with This Week in Tolkien History, or do we have a little bit more?
Almost. We have one more little bit here that we'll spend a little time on, because every once in a while when we do this segment, I like to dip into the secondary world and pull out a little something for This Week in Middle-earth History. And this is a great week for that, because on April 21st, year 2841 of the Third Age, Thrain set out to retake the Lonely Mountain.
That's right. Listeners will remember Gandalf's words to Thorin at the unexpected party in Bilbo's Hole in 2941. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since.
And as we've discussed previously on the podcast, we get a lot more detail on both of their fates, both Thror and Thrain, in Unfinished Tales, and also in Appendix A to Lord of the Rings. First, I'll go to the Unfinished Tales for the passage there. It says, Thror returned to Moria after giving to Thrain the last of the 7 rings of the dwarves, and was killed there by the orc Azog, who branded his name on Thror's brow. I always thought it was probably a good thing that his name wasn't like Azanulbazar or something like that, because how do you fit that on the brow? That would have hurt a good bit more
it would
than Azog. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, the only thing that would have been better is if his name was like Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
that's true.
I'm tasteless tonight, man. I don't know.
Or if he just, if he just went with an I or like an initial, maybe an A wouldn't be quite so
just
bad.
A. Yeah. Of course, it was already on his decapitated head, so I guess it really doesn't matter, does it?
Man, you are pretty dark tonight, aren't you?
I don't know. Maybe it's all that talk about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and the whole darkness.
Could have been. Well, yeah, you went straight for the cutting off of the head, so.
Yeah.
We've had.
Are we mentioning Celebrimbor tonight? Because I'm ready for that. I'm just totally kidding.
No, it's interesting. We've already referenced 2 characters who get decapitated here tonight.
That's true.
Let's see if we get some more.
A man's head lying in a pool of blood next to his own. No, that's right. A man's body
Little
lying
Highlander.
in a parking garage next to his own severed head.
Little Highlander reference there.
Yeah, you bet that was.
Yep, awesome.
There can be only one.
That's right. Oh, that movie. It's been so long since I've seen. I know I'm digressing now, but it's been so long since I've seen Highlander. I really.
It's got to have been 20 years for me, minimum.
Sean Connery, man.
Oh,
Sean Connery.
Probably the only time he's ever been. Yeah, the Scotsman playing a Spaniard.
The Scotsman playing an Egyptian named Juan Sanchez Villalobos.
That's right, an Egyptian with a Spanish name. I'd forgotten that.
I don't know how that works unless you're immortal. So
that's exactly what I'm thinking.
That's the explanation. Anyway,
that is the only explanation.
But I do love that movie, despite that kind of making me raise an eyebrow every time.
I agree. But let's get on with it. We've really gone off track.
We've gone far afield, haven't we?
What's this podcast about, Sean? I forget.
Yeah, let's hop on the back of the motorbike with the Kurgan and see if we can get back on track. So, Azog branded his name on Thror's brow, and it was this that led to the War of the Dwarves and the Orcs, which ended in the great battle of Azanulbazar, Nandahirian, before the east gate of Moria in the year 2799. Afterwards, Thrain and Thorin Oakenshield dwelt in the arid Luin. But in the year 2841, Thrain set out from there to return to the Lonely Mountain. While wandering in the lands east of Anduin, he was captured and imprisoned in Dol Guldur, where the ring was taken from him.
In fact, this is all very tied up with the ring itself, and so we get a lot more from Appendix A. Some thought that it, referring to the Dwarven ring, had remained in Khazad-dûm, in the secret tombs of the kings, if they had not been discovered and plundered. But among the kindred of Durin's heir, it was believed, wrongly, that Thror had worn it when he rashly returned there. What then had become of it, they did not know. It was perhaps partly by the malice of the ring that Thrain, after some years, became restless and discontented. The lust for gold was ever in his mind. At last, when he could endure it no longer, he turned his thoughts to Erebor and resolved to go back there. He said nothing to Thorin of what was in his heart, but with Balin and Dwalin and a few others, he arose and said farewell and departed. Little is known of what happened to him afterwards. It would now seem that as soon as he was abroad with few companions, he was hunted by the emissaries of Sauron. Wolves pursued him, orcs waylaid him, evil birds shadowed his path, and the more he strove to go north, the more misfortunes opposed him. There came a dark night when he and his companions were wandering in the land beyond Anduin, and they were driven by a black rain to take shelter under the eaves of Mirkwood. In the morning he was gone from the camp, and his companions called him in vain. They searched for him many days, until at last, giving up hope, they departed and came at length back to Thorin. Only long after was it learned that Thrain had been taken alive and brought to the pits of Dol Guldur. There he was tormented and the ring taken from him, and there at last he died.
Not a good end.
No.
But his departure onto that fateful quest started this week.
That's
And
right.
I guess that's not really something to celebrate, but I guess it is at least something to observe.
Commemorate. Yeah.
Commemorate. That's a good way of putting it. And I know it's been a few weeks now since Tolkien Reading Day, and people keep telling me this. Actually, people have been telling me this since Tolkien Reading Day last year, maybe the year before that.
Right.
People are always telling me, oh, well, don't forget, the Shire calendar is different from the Gregorian calendar. And
of course it is.
any date in their calendar is actually a few days off of ours. And yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead.
Pretty much.
I'm going to go ahead and celebrate things on the dates that Tolkien lists. I understand that I understand that those dates aren't totally equivalent, but no, sorry.
They're still dates. I still have a calendar.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all kind of a construct anyway. So
that is true. They're both calendars are constructs, folks.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, if you want to have a conversation with me about it, email me and we can talk about it. But I don't want to digress any further. I think it's time for us to get back to the book.
We probably
should. And catch up with the Fellowship, who mostly haven't died yet.
Mostly indeed. Too soon. But yes, let's get back to the book. Because, of course, we love the books here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
We do. We bring you other Tolkien stuff from time to time. But at heart, you know this. Alan and I are fans of Tolkien's books and books about Tolkien. That's what we love.
And as you know, we read a lot of books in preparation for the show every week. Now, if you'd like to get your hands on a book that we've mentioned, you're going to want to check out the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. There we have links to every book we've mentioned on the show.
And there's a lot of other great stuff there, too. Show notes and book links specific to each episode, outtakes, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and some other little extras are all just some of the many things you can find on our website.
That's right.
You'll also find a link to our online storefront. That's at teespring.com/stores/PPP, where you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and other great Prancing Pony Podcast gear. So please, go ahead and check that out.
Yeah. And now let's join the company as they hope to remain unscathed through the Golden Wood.
I have a good feeling about this.
But you know what? We're not going to actually start at the very beginning this time because, well, it's the second episode of the chapter, but we're not even going to begin where we left off. We're going to skip a paragraph, and I'm going to pick up there with Legolas introducing the river Nimrodel.
Okay.
Here is Nimrodel, said Legolas. Of this stream the Sylvan Elves made many songs long ago, and still we sing them in the north, remembering the rainbow on its falls and the golden flowers that floated in its foam. All is dark now, and the bridge of Nimrodel is broken down. I will bathe my feet, for it is said that the water is healing to the weary. He went forward and climbed down the deep cloven bank and stepped into the stream. Follow me, he cried. The water is not deep. Let us wade across. On the further bank we can rest, and the sound of the falling water may bring us sleep and forgetfulness of grief. One by one, they climbed down and followed Legolas. For a moment, Frodo stood near the brink and let the water flow over his tired feet. It was cold, but its touch was clean, and as he went on and it mounted to his knees, he felt that the stain of travel and all weariness was washed from his limbs.
Let's go ahead and go back to the paragraph you didn't read, actually, because I just want to kind of establish where we are here. So they've gone
Good point.
Just a mile further, mile into the forest, and they find another swift stream that joins the Silverlode.
Right.
And then we get to the part that you started reading with Legolas, identifying it for the group. Here's Nimrodel.
Right. He speaks with these exclamation points pretty often, doesn't he?
He does.
Noticed
Here's
that?
Nimrodel.
Follow me. Let us wade across.
It's a very elven thing, isn't it? He's very excitable. Yeah.
Yes, he is.
It's one of those things that we kind of, if you're familiar with the movies and you're thinking of Orlando Bloom, he's got this kind of brooding intensity all the time.
Yeah.
Legolas is actually, he's cheery. He's passionate. He's very, he's excitable.
Mm-hmm. He is.
But then because he's so excitable, he actually starts talking about songs that he wants to sing.
Yeah.
There's many songs about this stream by the Sylvan Elves, and he says we still sing them. And with this mention of the Sylvan Elves, I know we've talked about them a couple of times before, but I think this is a good time to go back to Unfinished Tales, to the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, Appendix A, to get a little bit more on who these particular elves are. And I'm going to read from that now.
Okay.
In a late etymological discussion of the names Galadriel, Celeborn, and Lórien, the Sylvan Elves of Mirkwood and Lórien are specifically declared to be descended from the Telleran Elves, who remained in the Vale of Anduin. The Sylvan Elves, to Warwyth, were in origin Teleri, and so remoter kin of the Sindar, though even longer separated from them than the Teleri of Valinor. They were descended from those of the Teleri who, on the great journey, were daunted by the misty mountains, and lingered in the Vale of Anduin, and so never reached Beleriand or the sea. They were thus closer akin to the Nandor, otherwise called the Green Elves of Osiriand, who eventually crossed the mountains and came at last into Beleriand.
That's right. And the text goes on to say that they became a small and scattered people, hardly to be distinguished from Avari. But they did still recall their heritage and welcomed, quote, those of the Noldor and especially the Sindar who did not pass over the sea but migrated eastward. Under the leadership of these, they became again ordered folk and increased in wisdom.
Interesting. So the leadership of the Noldor among the Sylvan Elves.
Or
That's exactly
or the
what we're gonna
Sindar.
see here.
Or the Sindar who had migrated eastward, right? Either one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And we're going to be seeing some of that as soon as we meet the folks who are in charge here. But first, we got to get there. And there's a problem, which is that the bridge is broken down.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. So they have to cross by fording the stream.
Very cold water.
Very cold water. But like Legolas says, this is healing. It's healing to the weary. Let's come on in. The water's not deep, and it will help us.
Come on in. The water's freezing cold, but still otherwise fine.
But still otherwise fine. There you go.
But yeah, it's not deep. We can wade across. Let's sleep and forget grief. I mean,
I love that because he's not even talking about the water itself. He's talking about the sound of the water. Yeah, you were headed there too. The sound of the falling water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing.
It really is. It's a beautiful scene. It makes you think. It just reminds you how much water means to the elves.
Mm.
You know, the fact that they woke near Cuiviénen, and the sound of falling water was the first thing they heard, just as stars were the first things that they saw.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And of course, they cross. Like you said, the water is cold, but it's clean, and Frodo feels the weariness leave his limbs.
Mm.
This really has an actual, tangible, physiological effect on his body.
Yeah, it definitely does.
This is fairy.
Yeah, it is. And I think, Tolkien just says that its touch was clean, which can be read very, very literally. But I think it means something more here. I think it means it's spiritually clean.
Yeah, it's pure. I think it's interesting. The first thing I'm thinking of is another river that was enchanted, but that when you stepped into it, weariness didn't wash from your limbs. Weariness washed into all of your limbs and your torso too and made you fall asleep.
Oh, yeah, the Mirkwood River.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't this interesting? Sort of a contrast there, huh?
That is especially interesting because when we did our episodes on The Hobbit, we ended up concluding that the spell on that river was actually from the Mirkwood Elves, didn't we?
Right, from Thranduil.
Yeah, so...
Maybe we were wrong. Maybe it originated with... I mean, Dol Guldur is so far south, it just doesn't make any sense.
It is so far south.
I think that's why we ended up landing on Thranduil.
I think that is why, yeah. We talked about all the elvish and fairy things that they see there, and certainly there's some nasty stuff there too. There's spiders and and then the nasty mushrooms and stuff like that. But but yeah, I'd have to go back and listen to those episodes again. But yeah, we did conclude that was from the Mirkwood Elves, and here we see
may have been polluted by the forest itself, right? I mean, by that point, the forest is infected, if you will.
It could have been an enchantment from. It could have been an enchantment from the elves that was, I don't know, polluted by the forest. But
yeah.
Maybe I'm getting overly complicated now.
Maybe. I just like the contrast. The fact that here, instead of weariness entering you, it leaves you. It's really neat.
Yeah. Regardless of the significance, it's a really interesting contrast. That's cool.
And now we get to the song itself, and I'm going to go ahead and have you pick up there.
Okay. At length a silence fell, and they heard the music of the waterfall running sweetly in the shadows. Almost Frodo fancied that he could hear a voice singing, mingled with the sound of the water. "Do you hear the voice of Nimrodel?" asked Legolas. "I will sing you a song of the maiden Nimrodel, who bore the same name as the stream beside which she lived long ago. It is a fair song in our woodland tongue, but this is how it runs in the Westron speech, as some in Rivendell now sing it." In a soft voice hardly to be heard amid the rustle of the leaves above them, he began. "An elven maid there was of old, a shining star by day. Her mantle white was hemmed with gold, her shoes of silver gray. A star was bound upon her brows, a light was on her hair, as sun upon the golden boughs in Lórien the fair."
That is beautiful. And we're going to skip a few verses And then I'll pick up several later. Amroth beheld the fading shore now low beyond the swell, and cursed the faithless ship that bore him far from Nimrodel. Of old he was an elven king, a lord of tree and glen, when golden were the boughs in spring in fair Lothlórien. And then we have a special guest to read the last two.
The wind was in his flowing hair, foam about him shone. Afar they saw him strong and fair go riding like a swan. But from the west has come no word, and on the hither shore no tidings elven folk have heard of Amroth evermore.
Thank you, Professor.
Love it.
Absolutely love it. It is always such a pleasure to give you a little snippet from the J.R.R. Tolkien audio collection.
Always fun stuff, and folks should definitely buy that if they don't have it already.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about this poem. And well, actually, before that, why don't we go ahead and talk about the prose passage that introduces it?
Yeah, that's probably a better place to start.
So we see the company resting and eating.
Yeah.
Legolas starts to tell them tales of Lothlórien that the elves of Mirkwood kept in their hearts.
Right.
And then Frodo suddenly hears this voice. He suddenly thinks he hears a voice singing, a voice in the water itself.
How amazing is that? I wonder if that's maybe due to his being an elf friend. Does he have some sort of extra special, I don't know, perception? Does he have a bonus to his perception roll in this case?
Could be.
I don't know.
Is he...
He's the one who hears it, right? We don't hear that Aragorn fancies that he could hear the voice singing, or Boromir.
Well, but it is Frodo's point of view here, so we just
That's
don't
true.
know.
We're often Frodo is kind of the default viewpoint. I mean, earlier when we get to the river, it is Frodo that we see the river.
I would have to think that Aragorn would hear it.
Oh, I'm sure
Aragorn has walked in this country so much.
Yeah.
And maybe not all the others do.
No, I think Aragorn would be the only other one.
Yeah.
I mean, Gandalf would if he were here.
Yeah. I don't know, because, we'll get to this in a little bit, but this story has all the hallmarks of like one of those classic stories from mythology about a place, about a person transforming into a natural feature, or a person, leaving their mark on a natural feature.
Right.
I would not be surprised if more people can hear this than we think.
Oh, maybe.
And maybe we only see it from Frodo's point of view. I don't know.
Be. Yeah. I don't know. I like that Legolas says he's going to sing a song for everybody, but he's going to translate it into Westron. He doesn't. The implication is that it's not going to be as nice, right? It's a fair song in our woodland
It's totally
song,
the implication.
But this is how it runs in your language.
Yeah. Here's the inferior Westron form, the way you people
And then he
talk.
gets a ding on Rivendell, as some in Rivendell now sing it.
Boy, you're not kidding about that, yeah.
Yeah. Like, they pervert
those
the woodland tongue here.
uncouth people of Rivendell who translate things into Westron, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting.
It just was an interesting thing. But let's take a second to observe that when he talks about their woodland tongue, he's talking about Sindarin here. So that same Appendix A that we've referred to before, to the history of Galadriel and Celeborn in Unfinished Tales, that reminds us that Thranduil, father of Legolas of the Nine Walkers, was Sindarin, and that tongue was used in his house, though not by all his folk. But it clearly differed from the Sindarin that Frodo knew. As we see later, he could understand little of what was said between Haldir and Legolas at their initial meeting. So let's go back to that appendix in Unfinished Tales again. In what way their Sindarin differed from the forms of Beleriand is not, of course, now known. It probably differed in little more than what would now be popularly called accent, mainly differences of vowel sounds and intonation sufficient to mislead one who, as Frodo, was not well acquainted with purer Sindarin. There may, of course, also have been some local words and other features ultimately due to the influence of the former Sylvan tongue. Lórien had long been much isolated from the outside world. Certainly some names preserved from its past, such as Amroth and Nimrodel, cannot be fully explained from Sindarin, though fitting it in form.
Yeah, so this is an interesting little enigma about the Sylvan tongue, because as you say, that it does clearly appear to be Sindarin for the most part, but it's a slightly different dialect of Sindarin, I guess you could call it. And yet, as you said, we are told later on that Frodo has trouble understanding. He could understand little of what was said later on in their woodland tongue. Now, I did a little bit more research on this for kind of a mini sidebar. And
of course
Parma
you did.
Eldelampron, of course I did, because that's what you do when you have Parma Eldelampron 17, is you use it every chance you get when you're reading Lord of the Rings.
Who needs the rest of those Parma Eldelambrons, apparently?
17 is the one to get if you're a Lord of the Rings fan.
Yeah, if you can only get one, there you go.
Yeah, that's the one. But in that issue, Christopher Gilson, who's the editor of that, offers some commentary on the Sylvan tongue, such as it is, because, there are some differences.
Yeah.
There's several pages of commentary there, but since I know a lot of people don't have that book, I've actually pulled some of the major points out for you.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Gilson says that actually the matter of the elvish tongue of the Sylvan folk is rather confused in The Lord of the Rings. It is said that Frodo could understand little of what Haldir and Legolas said to one another, because their language was unlike that of the West. But Mellirn, Darrow, Talan, Irch, and also Hithline, but not certainly Lembas, are Sindarin. Most of them, for example Irch, plural, specifically so and not credible as the natural forms of a different speech, even though a related one. The names also are Sindarin for the most part. Celeborn, Celebrant, Ninth of Lórien, or might formally be so as Haldir, Karen, Karas, Orifin, Legolas, Thranduil, Amroth, Nimrodel, are suitable to Sindarin sounds and patterns, but are not clearly etymologizable as Sindarin.
Wow, there's a mouthful.
That's a heck of a word.
At a what? At a who?
Right. But I think, the point there is that some of these names, they have Sindarin sounding phonology to them. They sound like they could be Sindarin.
Phonology sounds
but if you
Sindarin.
try to trace them to Sindarin roots, they don't necessarily line up correctly, which would
Right.
suggest that they're from another language.
That's correct.
And then Gilson says there's also the issue of Haldir's brother Rumil, who is inexplicably named after an ancient Noldorin lore master.
Yeah, that is a little bit of a sore thumb. It really stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Now, Helga Fevskager points out on his website, Artalambion, that all that is known of the Nandarin tongue is about 30 words, most of which are found in the etymologies, which are in the Lost Road. Wrote Tolkien, and this is in the Unfinished Tales, though the comparison of the Sylvan dialects with their own speech greatly interested the lore masters, especially those of Noldorin origin, little is now known of the Sylvan Elvish. The Sylvan Elves had invented no forms of writing, and those who learned this art from the Sindar wrote in Sindarin as well as they could. Elsewhere in Vinyar Tengwar, he refers to the now almost entirely lost tongue of the Nandor.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to Parma Eldalamberon, Gilson actually says a few pages later from the passage I was just reading, he says, nothing of this Sylvan speech appears in The Lord of the Rings, except Darrow and Irch. Both these are, or could be, Sindarin. It is probable, therefore, that the speech was a Nandarin dialect, if it was not, in fact, simply a locally modified form of Sindarin. Actually, in The Lord of the Rings, no Avaran language appears, meaning a language of the Avari, and such elves as appear are, if not actually high elves of Noldorin origin, of Eldarin origin, or small peoples that have come under Eldarin influence and become assimilated.
And that helps us understand how these Sylvan elves are speaking what's basically Sindarin, even though it has some differences, as Tolkien suggested in the passage that kicked off this sidebar.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of assimilating to the higher elves, the Sindar and so forth.
Right.
But sadly, there's just not enough of the pure Sylvan language out there for us to know much about it. 30 words just isn't that much to go on.
No, it really isn't. But let's go ahead and move on to the song itself, huh?
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the song after that little sidebar. We'll talk a little bit about some of the stanza structure and some of what's in here. I don't have a whole lot to say on the structure here. One thing I did notice when I read this was that there really is a lot of imagery in the first few stanzas about Nimrodel, and there's a couple of sort of patterns or themes you can see here. The first two stanzas compare her to a star. Right. They actually say she's a shining star by day, her mantle
star
white
bound upon her brows. Yeah,
light was on her hair like the sun. Yeah, all that is very much comparing her to a star. In the next stanza, the third stanza, we actually get a comparison to her like a tree.
Oh yeah.
We even see a reference to her limbs, which is kind of a double entendre in that sense.
That's true.
Talking about her in the wind, comparing her to a leaf of linden tree, which we'll talk about again in a moment.
Yeah, we will.
And then in the stanza after that, we get this comparison to water. Beside the falls, by water clear and cool. And this it's description of her voice, which of course is the feature which she's left behind on the world. And that is the first thing they notice of her. So that was just kind of a cool progression. I didn't really get anything that carries that forward throughout in the poem, but I thought it was a really interesting way to start.
I think so too.
I did say we would talk a little bit about this third stanza mention of Nimrodel going light as leaf of linden tree.
Yeah.
That phrase jumped out to me, and I think it probably jumped out to you too, Alan,
Yes, it did.
because it is a striking parallel to, I mean, it's almost exactly the same phrase. Light as leaf on linden tree was the name of a poem that Tolkien wrote early on, published it originally in 1925. And after many revisions, Light as leaf on linden tree actually became the song we now know as Strider's Song of Beren and Luthien
That's
in
right.
Book 1.
Mhm.
And I just thought it very interesting that it was mentioned here in this poem because it is such a clear parallel. I couldn't really understand why Tolkien was using that phrase here because obviously this is not a song about Beren and Luthien. This is a song about
Right.
Nimrodel and Amroth.
Yeah, very different story.
But since it was a plant, I looked it up in Flora of Middle-earth, and I did find something
I
there.
hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, well, anytime I see something about a plant that makes me wonder,
Boom,
I go there
Flora.
first because they pull in a lot of great stuff.
Yeah,
And they actually did point out that the phrase light as leaf on linden may have been traditional because it occurs in the postscript to Chaucer's Clerk's Tale as advice to wives to be eye of cheer as light as leaf on linde.
There you go. Well, the Judds go on to point out that in Germanic cultures, linden trees were associated with judicial courts and festivities, including dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And this connection possibly prompted both this traditional usage and Tolkien's link of linden leaves and Luthien's dancing.
Yeah, that was a neat connection to the
Yeah,
dancing.
I
They
agree.
also said that lindens don't appear in Tolkien's writing very often. They appear in the Luthien poem and here, and once more in Fangorn Forest. But the Judds seem to be suggesting that the line may be used here because it was more of a formula of medieval English literature, and so more of a reference to Chaucer and medieval
Right.
English literature rather than a reference to Beren and Luthien specifically.
In other words, both the Beren and Luthien passage and this passage are hearkening back to the same source, as opposed
Exactly.
to this hearkening back to Beren and Luthien.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So it's worth noting, by the way, that although that early Beren and Luthien poem was titled Light as Leaf on Linden Tree, the phrase itself actually didn't appear in the poem. Now, it does appear in this one, so this really is a different poem. It's even a different
Yeah,
meter.
that's true.
The Strider's Song of Beren and Luthien was in iambic tetrameter, I believe, with 8-syllable lines grouped into 8-line stanzas.
That's right. Yeah, it was meant to be a Westron translation of an Elvish form that was called An Thennath.
An Thennath, right.
Whereas this poem is a completely different structure. It's in 4-line stanzas, and they're not all 8-syllable lines. They actually alternate between 8 syllables and 6 syllables.
Yeah.
Michael Drout's J.R.R. Tolkien Encyclopedia reminded me that this is actually called ballad form. And the rhyme scheme of this particular ballad is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. So basically every other line in the stanza rhymes.
Right. I'm glad you pointed out the ballad form thing because that gets me to one of my favorite points about this is that because it's in ballad form, you can sing the whole thing to the tune of Gilligan's Island.
That's right.
Which
That's right. You
I
can.
shall now sing. No, okay, just one verse, right?
We can do it. We can do it together.
I can't do it. The wind was in his flowing hair, the foam about him shone. Afar they saw him strong and fair, go riding like a swan. Go riding like a swan.
There you go. See?
Anyway, I just want to know where Marianne is.
Well, we all do. That is one of my favorite things about the ballad form. That actually also works with Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Yes,
which is
it
one of my
does.
favorite poems of all time. And I think every Emily Dickinson poem. Certainly,
I think you might be right.
Most of the popular ones.
Most of them. Yeah. That is awesome.
So anyway, let's get back to the poem a little bit. Got a reference
Yeah, and not
here.
the one about the tiny ship being tossed in the
No,
3-hour
not that one.
3-hour cruise. No.
Or because I could not stop for death, or the guy killing the albatross. Yeah. So let's see. We get this reference in one of the middle stanzas. Sorry, I'm not going to count it. To a Haven Grey, an elven ship in Haven Grey. Now, worth pointing out, that's not actually a reference to the Grey Havens. That's a reference to Etheland.
Mm-hmm.
Hammond and Scull point out that aside from this inclusion in Legolas's poem, there are just a few mentions of this haven in the Legendarium.
That's correct.
The comment by Legolas later in this chapter that the elves of Lórien set sail from the Bay of Belfalas, Haldyr's statement, also in this chapter, that the haven in the south no longer exists, and the greeting of Legolas to Imrahil of Dol Amroth, that's going to be in Return of the King, in which Legolas said, "It is long since the people of Nimrodel left the woodlands of Lórien, and yet still one may see that not all sailed from Amroth's haven west over water. And Unfinished Tales, History of Galadriel and Celeborn mention it, no surprise there. After the breaking of Thangorodrim, the elves of Beleriand, if they did not take ship over the Great Sea or remain in Lindon, wandered east over the Blue Mountains into Eriador. But there appears nonetheless to have been a group of Sindar who in the beginning of the Second Age went south. They were a remnant of the people of Doriath, who harbored still their grudge against the Noldor.
Boy,
we're going to let go of that one anytime soon, were they?
Oh, man, like a rabid dog.
It's been centuries, guys.
I'm going to keep chewing on this grudge. Grudges taste good.
All they did was, kill your kinsmen and steal their ships and then, bring curses and condemnation
and Morgoth
back to Beleriand and Morgoth, and leading to the Dagor Bragollach and everything catching fire and everything being destroyed, and dragons, and Silmarils and stabbed ankles. And
why are you still holding the grudge, man?
I don't know. Come on, man. It's been a few centuries. Anyway.
Blink of an eye for an elf.
That is true. That is a good point. And having remained a while at the Grey Havens, where they learned the craft of shipbuilding, they went in the course of years seeking a place for lives of their own. And at last they settled at the mouth of the Morthond.
There you have it. So that's where
that's
Ethelon
this harbor to the south. Ethelon, yep.
Now, another line we get in here talks about a wind by night in northern lands. Now, that refers to a storm mentioned in the brief writing Amroth and Nimrodel in Unfinished Tales, where Tolkien provides more detail. But we're going to get to the prose version of the story later.
Yes, we will. Now, we've got this reference here to actually the part that you read, right? Amroth beheld the fading shore. This is actually the first time we learned the name of her beloved. And we have here, surprise, surprise, a little word nerdery on his name.
I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you.
I know. You can always count on us to pull out a little word nerdery.
There you go.
Although you found this one for me, I have to admit. In that same writing, Amroth and Nimrodel, which is part of the history of Galadriel and Celeborn in Unfinished Tales, we learn that the name Amroth is explained as being a nickname, derived from his living in a high talan or flet, the wooden platforms built high up in the trees of Lothlórien, in which the Galadrim dwelt. And we'll be seeing that very soon in this chapter. It meant up climber, high climber.
That's right. But Christopher Tolkien explains further that this supposes that the first element in the name Amroth is the same Elvish word as Quenya Amba, meaning up, found also in Sindarin Amon, a hill or mountain with steep sides, while the second element is a derivative from a stem Rath, meaning climb.
That's right. I love that little connection to Amba and Amon. That's really cool.
Isn't that cool?
That's what I love about etymology.
I know. So neat.
Right before the first stanza that we had the professor read for us, the last line of the previous stanza refers to a mew upon the wing, M-E-W. I just wanted to point out for folks that a mew is a gull.
That's right. Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out because I had to actually look that up once, not too many years back. I was finally tired of not knowing what that meant.
Yeah, same here. It's not a cat crying.
No.
Meow, 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 meow.
Oh, no.
You're sneezing already, I can tell.
I know. I'm starting to get an itchy nose just thinking about it. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up right after the end of the verse here with Legolas sort of deciding he can't finish the song, can he?
True. That's right. Yeah.
The voice of Legolas faltered, and the song ceased. I cannot sing any more, he said. That is but a part, for I have forgotten much. It is long and sad, for it tells how sorrow came upon Lothlórien, Lórien of the Blossom, when the dwarves awakened evil in the mountains. But the dwarves did not make the evil, said Gimli. I said not so, yet evil came, answered Legolas sadly. Then many of the elves of Nimrodel's kindred left their dwellings and departed, and she was lost far in the south, in the passes of the White Mountains, and she came not to the ship where Amroth her lover waited for her. But in the spring, when the wind is in the new leaves, the echo of her voice may still be heard by the falls that bear her name. And when the wind is in the south, the voice of Amroth comes up from the sea, for Nimrodel flows into Silverlode, that elves call Celebrant, and Celebrant into Anduin the Great, and Anduin flows into the bay of Belfalas, whence the elves of Lórien set sail. But neither Nimrodel nor Amroth came ever back.
I kind of hoped he would go on a little longer and describe more rivers that flow into other rivers. But
I know, wouldn't that have been helpful?
I guess he ran out of rivers to talk about.
Which then flows into the sea, which then flows around the continent of Hammond, and
exactly,
and becomes Belagire, and then Achaia. Right, exactly. I mean,
on which are the borders of the circles of the world, beyond which are the timeless halls and the void.
Oh, and then of course beyond that is the void. So really, you just go straight from Nimrodel to the void.
It's the Elvish version of the total perspective vortex.
I can see Legolas now. He's into the silver load, and he says, "If I take one more step, this will be the farthest from home I've ever been."
Yeah.
It's a dangerous road, Mr. Legolas, when you step out into the river.
You don't know where it'll take you.
My goodness.
Well,
he does get a little distracted there, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. But it's great stuff. So let's go back to the beginning of that passage. The voice of Legolas faltered. Well, for one thing, he's just kind of forgotten some of the song.
Well, yeah.
But he's also sad. And is he sad just because the evil that was awakened by the dwarves is the evil that just killed his buddy Gandalf? Or is this more of a existential sadness and elvish sadness? Or is it both?
I sort of lean towards the latter. I mean, I suppose there might be a touch of that, but I think the fact that he's talking about something in the distant past and doesn't end up bringing up Gandalf, I think suggests to me that his sorrow is about the sorrow from the song.
From the
sorrow
song itself.
From the history of this story, the fact that that she was lost. Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, that certainly seems to fit the context. I just think it's interesting that he talks about the dwarves awakening evil in the mountains.
Yeah, the timing is definitely a little suspicious there.
Maybe it's just top of mind for him right now, because he's in this place. He's just seen the evil, really realized what the evil is for the first time.
Yeah,
and so he's bringing it up. Poor Gimli feels like he has to defend the honor of the dwarves. He's like, "Hey, we didn't make the evil.
We didn't make the evil. It was always evil.
Burning.
It was always buried.
It was always burning since it fell with Morgoth."
Oh my goodness, yeah. I don't think we've had too many Billy Joel references before. That might actually be the first.
I don't think we have.
No, I'd probably remember that.
I don't think we've had any Billy Joel song titles either, or episode titles.
I'm almost certain we haven't.
No.
Legolas here, I love his response. Basically, don't put words in my mouth. I didn't tell you that's what they did. I didn't say anything about the dwarves causing it. They just woke it up.
Right.
It's not what I said, Gimli. Ears of a fox. You aren't listening.
Mr. Wooden Ears.
I know, seriously.
Yeah. But so, we get the rest of the story here. Nimrodel's kindred left.
Yep.
And she was lost in the south. She never came to Amroth.
Poor guy.
But in the spring, her voice is still heard in the falls.
That's right.
And then when the wind is in the south, Amroth's voice comes up.
Isn't that amazing?
Neither one of them came back. It is, yeah.
No.
And,
very
neither
sad.
one of them came back. And again, I said this a little earlier, but I feel like this is like this is sort of one of those classic stories that you might hear in Greek mythology, or
absolutely,
right out of like Ovid's Metamorphoses or something. One of these stories about people, ill-fated lovers who turned into something beautiful in nature.
Some natural feature.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
beautiful
it is.
Moment.
Still sorrowful. Yeah, very
sad but beautiful. Yeah.
Bittersweet. But let's take a break and look at Unfinished Tales, where we get more of their story. I want to dig into this a little bit.
Okay, good.
First, we learn that in an earlier history, Amroth was originally thought of as the son of Galadriel and Celeborn. Now,
that's right.
Tolkien eventually rejected that idea, of course, and he settled on this one instead. Amroth was king of Lórien after his father Amdir was slain in the Battle of Dagorlad in the year 3434 of the Second Age. His land had peace for many years after the defeat of Sauron. Though Sindarin in descent, he lived after the manner of the Sylvan Elves, and housed in the tall trees of a great green mound, ever after called Cairn Amroth. This he did because of his love for Nimrodel. For long years he had loved her, and taken no wife, since she would not wed with him. She loved him indeed, for he was beautiful even for one of the Eldar, and valiant and wise. But she was of the Sylvan Elves, and regretted the incoming of the elves from the west, who, as she said, brought wars and destroyed the peace of old.
Man, the Teleri just cannot let that go, can they?
No, seriously. And maybe you ought to move on. If she's that much of an ideologue, yeah, you might. She's going to... Yeah, it's going to be a bit of an activist for you there. Yeah.
Well, she even spoke only Sylvan to make her point, apparently.
Wow. Boy, that is, which is really hard when you only have 30 words to choose from.
I'm guessing she knew more.
I'm sure she did.
I think we just don't know them.
I know.
That is a hilarious thought, though.
I know. Can you imagine? I speak a language that has only 30 words, but I'm going to speak this language, dang it.
Yeah.
Oh,
they have to use the same word for like mom and peanut butter sandwich. You know?
You got to figure it out from context.
Yeah, exactly.
I want a whatever in my lunch. Well, I'm going to assume you mean a sandwich.
I'm going
to hope. Oh, man.
So anyway, but yes, she spoke only Sylvan, and she lived alone by the river that now bears her name. And as Legolas hints, when the dwarves awoke Durin's Bane and the orcs came to Moria, she ran away. Amroth followed and found her, and after a long debate, they were engaged.
Presumably,
and that's
Sylvan.
right. The text actually says, there Amroth and Nimrodel held a long debate, and at the last they plighted their troth.
So romantic.
I know.
The sparks.
So,
you just
Nimmy,
feel the
did
energy.
he
This would make a great
propose?
rom-com.
Did he finally propose? Like, no, but we debated for hours.
And then we finally plighted our troth.
And we finally plighted our troth. Okay.
That is awesome.
Are you
More
sure
people
he's
should
the
get
one,
engaged
hon?
that way. I think more people should do that. That's great.
They should. So they got engaged, but there was a condition. He had to bring her to a land of peace, which meant they had to leave Middle-earth altogether and go west.
Man, she is high maintenance. She is just, dude, move on, man. She doesn't even want to speak your language. She thinks you're good looking, but she wants nothing to do with you.
Because she thinks your people brought war and
destroyed the
destruction to her land.
Which is a valid point.
It is totally a valid point.
Right, yeah. Right, exactly. And then she debates with you about whether or not to get engaged. And then she finally says, yes, but. Which is not how you want to hear the answer to that. If you actually ask somebody to marry you, you don't want to hear, well.
All this tells me is that Amroth wrote the story, okay?
Well, that's, clearly. Probably true.
Or one of his buddies. Probably was written by one of his, like his old roommate.
Yeah, the guy who would have given the toast at the wedding.
Yeah.
You know, he's the guy who would have, had there been one, spoiler, given the toast,
Yeah. He's just mad that his buddy ran away to be with some girl. Classic story.
Who he never understood because she wouldn't speak his language.
You know, if she'd only spoke something other than Sylvan, maybe we could have spoken to her and come to some agreement. Anyway.
So there was a condition. What was the condition?
So there was a condition. They had to find a land of peace, which meant they had to leave Middle-earth altogether because, Middle-earth,
right.
And they had to go west.
Okay.
Now, they decide to go through Gondor to Etheland, which we talked about earlier, and catch an elven ship heading to the Undying Lands. But they get separated on the way, and Amroth gets to the haven, hoping to find her there.
Hoping to find her there before the travel ban goes into effect. And they're not allowed to catch the ship to the Undying Lands unless they bring something with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, there was only one ship, so we got on it. I mean, there's only one ship. What are you going to do? Sure. And that's when we get back to the text and we get a bit more on the storm that we saw in the poem. So here we're back into the unfinished tales. The year was waning to autumn, and before long, great winds were to be expected, hostile and dangerous, even to elven ships while they were still near to Middle-earth. But so great was the grief of Amroth that nonetheless they stayed there going for many weeks, and they lived on the ship, for their houses on the shore were stripped and empty. Then in the autumn there came a great night of storm, one of the fiercest in the annals of Gondor. It came from the cold northern waste and roared down through Eriador into the lands of Gondor, doing great havoc. The White Mountains were no shield against it, and many of the ships of men were swept out into the Bay of Belfalas and lost. The light elven ship was torn from its moorings and driven into the wild waters towards the coasts of Umbar. No tidings of it were ever heard in Middle-earth, but the elven ships made for this journey did not founder, and doubtless it left the circles of the world and came at last to Eresia. But it did not bring Amroth thither. The storm fell upon the coasts of Gondor just as dawn was peering through the flying clouds, But when Amroth woke, the ship was already far from land. Crying aloud in despair, "Nimrodel!" he leapt into the sea and swam towards the fading shore. The mariners, with their elvish sight, for a long time could see him battling with the waves, until the rising sun gleamed through the clouds and far off lit his bright hair like a spark of gold. No eyes of elves or men ever saw him again in Middle-earth. Of what befell Nimrodel, nothing is said here, though there were many legends concerning her fate. Oh,
That's a heartbreaking,
that's a heart-wrenching
but
ending.
very cool story.
Oh, isn't it? I know. I mean, it's sad for them, but what a cool story.
It is.
It is.
But sad.
Mm-hmm.
To everybody except for Amroth's buddy, who's just glad that
Who got to write the story. Yeah. The hit song that's still being sung centuries
That's
later.
true. Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah. The royalties on that, man.
This is
He's
like
raking it in.
And it's a long one, too. It's like American Pie or something. It's just,
Oh, yeah. There's no radio edit for this one.
No. Well, there's Legolas's sort of radio edit, just because he forgets
that's the
half
forgetful
of it.
edit. That's the forgetful mix.
Yeah. He's been through a lot. It's been a tough day.
He has, yeah.
But anyway, getting back to the text, after the passage that you read, we get the name of the Galadrim, the tree people.
Right. It's the first time we get that, isn't it? Is that the first time we see the word, or is that the first time we see what it means, the tree people, and that's who these people are?
It is the first time we get the word.
That's what I thought.
Yep. It is actually the first time we get the word. Yep. And it does simply mean tree people.
Mm-hmm. They're tree people because they didn't delve into the ground, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're tree people because they live in the trees.
Well, right, because they didn't delve into the ground,
right,
or build stone places until the shadow came.
Yeah.
Speaking of people who delve into the ground and build stone places, Gimli says, really maybe the trees would be a good place to live at the moment. That might be a safe place. We should probably do that.
That's interesting that it's Gimli, of all people, saying that.
I know, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Aragorn's like, well, you know what? You make a good point, Gimli. Let's do that. Let's go ahead and get up into the trees because
that's a good
the road
idea.
Isn't safe. Get off the road. That's what Aragorn says.
Let's listen to the dwarf and climb a tree.
There you go. Not something you're going to hear every day, by the way.
No.
So,
although strangely, almost every dwarf we've ever met in the Legendarium climbs a tree at some point.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, in The Hobbit, they all had to climb trees to avoid the ravenous wargs and
Gimli does it here.
Goblins.
I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
I mean, I can't imagine Azaghal climbing a tree, but...
No, I don't see King Dain climbing a tree.
No, he probably wouldn't.
No.
He'd probably rip it out by its roots and swing it like a club.
That's right. Then he'd get a name like Oakenshield, right? It'd be like...
Exactly, yeah.
Dane Tree Club.
There you go. Well, we digress.
We do. All right. I'm going to go ahead and have you pick up right after that, now that they're turning off the road and into the trees. Fire away.
Okay. The company now turned aside from the path and went into the shadow of the deeper woods, westward, along the mountain stream, away from Silverlode. Not far from the falls of Nimrodel, they found a cluster of trees, some of which overhung the stream. Their great gray trunks were of mighty girth, but their height could not be guessed. "I will climb up," said Legolas. "I am at home among trees, by root or bough, though these trees are of a kind strange to me, save as a name and song. Mellirn they are called, and are those that bear the yellow blossom, but I have never climbed in one. I will see now what is their shape and way of growth." "Whatever it may be," said Pippin, "they will be marvelous trees indeed if they can offer any rest at night, except to birds. I cannot sleep on a perch." "Then dig a hole in the ground," said Legolas, "if that is more after the fashion of your kind. But you must dig swift and deep if you wish to hide from orcs."
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Quit your complaining, Pippin. You're going to do what you have to do.
That's right. I mean, come on now. You got to do what needs to be done.
Unless you have time to dig a hole
here. Right. Exactly.
And of course, Pippin wouldn't even dig a hole. He'd look for somebody he'd ask
hire.
Sam to dig a hole for him.
Sam, servant Sam, dig a hole. Fetch the water.
Yeah. We're so mean to Pippin. We're almost as mean. We have to be mean to Pippin because Gandalf isn't around to abuse
That's right.
him.
That's right. He's not. Yeah, he needs to be kept in his place here. Without Gandalf around to continually call him a fool, well, we'll point those things out. So the company heads deeper into the woods. They find a cluster of trees with very thick trunks.
Mm-hmm.
And what are these?
They are Mellirn trees that Legolas
Yes.
offers to climb up.
That's right.
Now, once again, this is clearly a Sindarin word. We get the plural form here, Mellirn, which is just formed by changing the vowels. We get the A and the O of singular Malorn changed to an E and a Y.
True.
Now, looking at the singular form of that, Malorn's etymology is simply gold tree. So you've got the orn element, which means tree, like in Celeborn.
Mm-hmm.
And then malt, the first part of that, which changes into mal in Malorn. Malt is the Sindarin cognate of the Quenya word Malta, which means gold.
Huh.
Now, the interesting thing about that is that Malta, meaning gold, usually refers to the metal, not the color gold. And if you remember several episodes back, we talked about the fact that in Elvish, there's usually one word for the metal and then one word for the color of the metal. Well, in this case, normally Malta would be the metal itself, not the color of the metal. But this is an exception, which in Parma El de Lambaron 17 again, Tolkien attributes to it being a later Sindarin word.
Fair enough. Now, we saw these trees earlier in the chapter, but this is the first time that they're named for us. Now, as a reminder, in Middle-earth, these grew only in Lothlórien, with one notable exception at the very end of this tale. But they originally came from Númenor, specifically from a region on the western side of Númenor, as we learn in Unfinished Tales. This is found in a description of the island of Númenor that I think sadly many people skip because it's not a story. Now, after listing several kinds of trees, the text tells us...
Does it tell us how to identify them from quite a long way away?
I knew that was coming. And I missed it. It was one of those things where half my brain was going, hello, and thank you, Sean, for pointing that out.
You're welcome. Glad
After listing several kinds of trees and telling us how to recognize them from a very long way away, the text tells us, flower, leaf, and rind of those trees exuded sweet scents, and all that country was full of blended fragrance. Therefore it was called Nisimaldar, the fragrant trees. I was about to say that might be, I don't know, the sneezy land.
Yeah.
I'm already like feeling my allergies act up. But
Pollen Alley.
Pollen Alley, I like that. Many of them were planted and grew, though far less abundantly, in other regions of Númenor, but only here grew the mighty golden tree Malinorne, reaching after 5 centuries a height scarce less than it achieved in Eressia itself. Its bark was silver and smooth, and its boughs somewhat upswept after the manner of the beech, not the larch. But it never grew save with a single trunk. Its leaves, like those of the beech but greater, were pale green above, and beneath were silver, glistering in the sun. In the autumn they did not fall, but turned to pale gold. In the spring it bore golden blossom in clusters like a cherry, which bloomed on during the summer, and as soon as the flowers opened, the leaves fell, so that through spring and summer a grove of Malinorne was carpeted and roofed with gold, but its pillars were of gray silver. Its fruit was a nut with a silver shale, and some were given as a gift by Tar Aldarion, the 6th king of Númenor, to King Gil-galad of Lindon. They did not take root in that land, but Gil-galad gave some to his kinswoman Galadriel, and under her power they grew and flourished in the guarded land of Lothlórien, beside the river Anduin, until the high elves at last left Middle-earth. But they did not reach the height or girth of the great groves of Númenor. Oh, I love that. I love finding little
that's a
nuggets like that.
Wonderful origin story of the Malorn.
Isn't it?
I love that.
What
That's
a great
fantastic.
story. And the hint here, not hint, I mean, it's there. You just have to read it. That even though they grew here in Númenor, in the one part of Númenor, they weren't even originally from there. They were originally from Eressia. That they, after 500 years, would reach a height only a little less than they got in Tol Eressëa.
Right. So once again, we have a tree from the west coming to Númenor and then coming to Middle-earth.
Making its way over to Middle-earth via Númenor. Mm-hmm.
So awesome. And these are these are absolutely beautiful trees.
Stunning.
And most of the artist renditions I've seen of them are just as beautiful as you imagine them.
Yeah.
It's just it's such a only Tolkien could invent a tree that's as beautiful as this.
Agreed.
I would gladly sleep in one. I don't care what Pippin says. I will sleep on
as long as there's a flat. I mean, I don't want to just like climb up into the branches.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not just going to like straddle a branch and try
straddle a limb and try to sleep that way.
No, I'm not going to do that, but they just sound absolutely gorgeous. But
they really are. What a beautiful thing, especially in spring. I kind of get Legolas now. Alas that it is not spring.
Yeah. I get that.
But, spring in Lothlórien, when the leaves are turning, all the tourists show up. It's kind of a crowded place to be. Hotel rates are high.
I know.
Yeah.
It's really hard
Can't
to
get a
find an
cab for
Airbnb that's
anything.
open.
Seriously.
Nope.
Nobody wants to take you to the Mirror of Galadriel.
No.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and read the next passage, and this should be interesting.
This is actually going to be our last one of the episode.
That's right. But even as he swung there for a moment, a voice spoke suddenly from the tree shadows above him. "Daro!" it said in commanding tone, and Legolas dropped back to earth in surprise and fear. He shrank against the bole of the tree. "Stand still," he whispered to the others. "Do not move or speak." There was a sound of soft laughter over their heads, and then another clear voice spoke in an elven tongue. Frodo could understand little of what was said, for the speech that the sylvan folk east of the mountains used among themselves was unlike that of the west. Legolas looked up and answered in the same language. "Who are they and what do they say?" asked Merry. "They're elves," said Sam. "Can't you hear their voices?" "Yes, they are elves," said Legolas, "and they say that you breathe so loud that they could shoot you in the dark." Sam hastily put his hand over his mouth. Sam, I love him. Like that's going to stop, like that's going to keep them from shooting in the dark now if they really wanted to.
Yeah, I know.
"But they say also that you need have no fear. They have been aware of us for a long while. They heard my voice across the Nimrodel and knew that I was one of their northern kindred, and therefore they did not hinder our crossing. And afterwards they heard my song. Now they bid me climb up with Frodo, for they seem to have had some tidings of him and of our journey. The others they ask to wait a little and to keep watch at the foot of the tree until they have decided what is to be done." "Daro!"
Yeah, Daro. Man, somebody shouts that at you, you're going to listen.
Yeah. I don't even know what it means, but I'm going to stop.
Don't even know what it means, but I'm going to listen to it, whatever it is.
Well, mostly because it's said in a commanding tone.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, really.
Yeah. Well, Hammond and Scull tell us what it means. They say it's Sindarin for stop or halt. Now, grammatically, this is an imperative form, which is what it should be because it's giving a command in a commanding tone. Now, we've seen other Sindarin imperatives with that O ending before. I'm thinking specifically of pedo, meaning speak or say, as on the door inscription.
Right. And Legolas, of course, goes back down and warns the others to be still.
Mm-hmm. They hear laughter, a clear voice in the elven tongue. Legolas answers. Merry and Sam have this little side dialogue. Sam obviously been around elves enough to know, like, dude, come on, they're elves, obviously. Come on.
Yeah. Can't you tell
them?
from their voices? And what do you think they're orcs, Merry? I mean, come on. You think they're hobbits that live out here in the woods?
These beautiful voiced things that live in the trees? Yeah, those are orcs, right?
In a land that we've been talking about, the elves live here.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Legolas has just been telling us.
Yeah,
this land is still populated.
This is elf country. And
Aragorn says we're going to try to find their city. They live further in the woods.
And then somebody speaks Elvish to you, which you don't recognize, but you could probably at least guess it's Elvish.
Right, yeah, it's not Mannish, and it doesn't sound like the Black Tongue.
Dwarvish or Orcish.
Yeah.
So you're in Elven country, and someone with a beautiful voice has just shouted at you in what sounds like Elvish, and you're thinking, Who is that? What is that person? Who are you an orc?
Oh, man.
He doesn't say, "Are you an orc?" But
well, no, of course not.
He just says, "Who are they?" Which I guess is fair.
Maybe he's just asking what are their names.
Maybe.
Probably.
Maybe he just wants to know which specific. That would have been a great response from Merry. Would have been like, "Yeah, I know they're elves, Sam. I said, who
do you
are
think
they?"
I'm stupid, Sam?
Yeah.
I can see him now. Yeah. I just meant, are you Sylvan elves? Are you Sindarin elves? Are you, I don't know, a stray Noldo? I mean, who are you?
Or what are their names? I mean, when I meet somebody on the street, I might say, I wouldn't say, "Who are you?" because that's not terribly polite. But I mean, I'm wondering who they are. I'm not wondering what manner of creature they are.
Who are you?
Oh, man. Yeah. Little Who reference.
Yeah, man. Sticking in my head now.
I haven't had enough Who references in the show.
No, we haven't. That is a shame. I bet we'll have an opportunity to have Won't Get Fooled again at some point.
Probably.
I mean, there really has got to be an opportunity for that. There probably will not be an opportunity for Pinball Wizard. I mean, I'm just thinking that might be a little, a little out of place.
I don't know. We don't know what technology Saruman has gotten up to there in Isengard.
He's playing the table up there.
The Uruk-hai are playing some pinball.
I love it.
In the barracks during their downtime.
spending all their quarters on the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, don't tilt it. Like, yeah.
They're always tilting it. That's the problem with orcs.
They're always
It's not
tilting it. Of
subtle.
course they are. They're orcs.
They're orcs.
You tilted it again.
I'm going to
I'll
report
kill
you,
you for that.
Sharky. That's
Yeah.
right. Oh, man.
Anyway,
Good stuff.
speaking of The Who, let's talk about The Who speaks one of the most famous lines from the movies.
Ah, yes.
So, obviously, everybody remembers this scene from Peter Jackson's movie. Hal Deer says this specifically about the dwarf breathes so loud we could shoot him in the dark.
Right after he talked about how he had the eyes of a hawk and the ears of a fox.
That's right. Yeah, going back to the possible reference to the ears of wood thing in the previous episode.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, this is a very memorable moment from the movie. It is pretty darn funny. I think that's part of it.
It really is. It's got a great sense of humor there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Craig Parker as Hal Deer is kind of a fan favorite. So I think that's another reason for it. But in the book, it's a bit different, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Hal Deer doesn't actually deliver the line. Legolas himself sort of forwards it along.
Yeah, that's true. We're to understand that Hal Deer actually said it, obviously, but Legolas is translating it, like you said, delivering it to them.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. But he's delivering it to all of them and not just to Gimli.
Not just to Gimli specifically. Yeah. And he says, they've been aware of us for a long time. They just didn't hinder us because of me.
That's right.
Because
I'm
of Legolas's
great.
voice and song, yeah.
Yeah.
But then they say they want Frodo to come up. They want Frodo to come up with Legolas while the others wait downstairs.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, this is probably a good sign, right? It says that they know something about Frodo and the journey, so
yeah, we'll find out.
Probably means that they want to help, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. How else would they know? How else would they have gotten tidings of Frodo and their journey?
Exactly.
I mean, we know that before the company left Rivendell, that they sent out scouts. And we know that Elladan and Elrohir wouldn't talk about where they went, but that it had been down the Silverlode.
That's right.
So, it put two and two together. It's really not that difficult. And of course, we'll get more specifically to that. I think we actually get that they heard from Rivendell. I think we get that. I may be wrong.
I can't recall off the top of my head, but it sounds right. Well, we'll see soon.
Well, I guess it's time for us to say, Dotto! Folks, stand still. Do not move or speak. After all, we have Barliman's bag coming your way in just a minute. And even when that's done, well, the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
That's right. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode. Well, not corrections on every episode, but on a lot of them.
Just about, yeah.
Feels that way. As well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
You will find corrections even if we haven't responded to them, because I guarantee you somebody will find something that they need to correct.
In most cases.
And I don't mean that as an insult. We're super grateful because...
No, we love those. Those
it's crowdsourced knowledge, man. I mean, we can't know everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we're so thankful that we have
correct us
listeners
if we
who are
get something
knowledgeable.
wrong.
That's absolutely
because that's
right.
the thing. This show is not scripted. I mean, we have talking points, and there's a couple of things we come in here knowing we want to say.
Well, right, and that our intro and outro are kind of pre-written, but when it comes to the discussion,
they're a bit more fleshed out. Yeah. But I mean, when it comes to the discussion, that's all. That's all just kind of happening.
Right. Very organic, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do occasionally say things that we haven't fully researched. So please,
that's right.
Let us know when we get it wrong. And even when we do research, sometimes. You forget to look at it wrong. Place.
It is possible, right? Of course, you can also let us know when we get it right. We're okay with that.
We like that
every once in a while. Yeah. But anyway. So we also have another common room, by the way, and now this one's on Reddit. You can find some really great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. Now, as always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod. So follow us wherever you happen to be. And if you like us, please share us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or anywhere you can find Tolkien fans.
And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more visible this podcast is, and that helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we built together.
And finally, if you'd like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and Discord hangouts and live episodes, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the Fellowship of the Podcast. Now, I think it's time to see what old Barliman has in the mailbag for us. Sean.
Well, first up, a number of listeners, including Olaf in the Netherlands, Chris in California, and Robert in California, have been writing to us over the past few months to ask us what's up with wizard staffs. Stabs? Or is it staves? Or staves? I don't even know.
I'm not sure.
I'm
What's
gonna
up
say
with the
staffs.
people that work for the wizards? I mean, they've
That's
got,
what we're...
benefits and good pay. What is the problem? No, I'm sorry, not those staffs.
There's certainly a lot of problems with the staff at Isengard, but we'll get into that
well,
later.
that's true. That's true.
No, of course, folks know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the big wooden stick things. What purpose do they serve?
Uh-huh.
Are they actually magical? Do they concentrate or focus their Maya power in some way, like magic wands or focus items like you might find in other fantasy books and fantasy games?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just walking sticks, a prop for age, as Hammond the Door Ward might say? Or are they something else entirely? Are they symbols of office? Are they a kind of rank insignia? And why do they always seem to get them back every time they lose them? Like when Gandalf is rescued from Orthanc by Gwaihir, or when he returns as Gandalf the White. Well, let's hold off on that one. We'll get to that in a moment. And the answer may not be what you think.
That's true. Now, it is a very interesting question. It's one that does get asked from time to time. Obviously, wizards with staves are a known thing from pop culture, but the question is, what purpose do staves serve for Tolkien's Istari? Now, first, I do think we can rule out the idea that they're merely walking sticks. Even Hammond knew that. Yes, we do see Gandalf use his staff as a walking stick at times. Most recently, as the Fellowship fled down the steps in Khazad-dûm, Gandalf felt the ground with his staff like a blind man. Also, on the bridge as he faced off against the wingless Balrog, we saw him leaning on the staff in his left hand. I'm not going to let that go. I'm like a Teleri with my grief against the...
That's right.
That's right. I'm going to speak the rest of this episode in Sylvan, all 30 words of it. Still, there are many other times that Gandalf, of course, used his staff to actually do magic.
Yeah, there totally are. I mean, just in the previous chapter, we saw his staff glimmering as a light source. We also saw him raise it to cast an even brighter light when they were up in that cavernous hall high in Moria, before they found the Chamber of Mazarbul. Before that, he actually touched his staff physically to several different objects to try and work magia on them. He did it while they were attempting the Pass of Caradhras. Remember, Gandalf thrust the end of his staff into that bundle of sticks that was wet to light it, and he shouted that command, Naurden Eddraith Amen.
Eddraith Amen. Yeah.
But he actually did thrust the end of his staff into the sticks.
Right.
He touched his staff to the door, to the star on the doors of Durin, while trying out some of those opening spells. And then when he finally figured out the right password, interestingly, when he said Melon, he didn't actually touch the doors with the staff, but he did pick it up before he said it. And that's not to mention many similar instances we've already seen in The Hobbit.
Oh, yeah, lots of them then.
Lots of them. And all of that does seem to suggest that the staff is some kind of focus item. Now, I've said before, I don't think it's a point-and-shoot kind of thing. I don't think it needs to be aimed.
No.
But it does seem that direct contact between his staff and the object that he wants to cast a spell on is an aid to the magia. And in some cases, the staff itself is the thing that gets a spell cast on it, like when it's used as a torch.
Yeah, that's true. I like what you said about not being a point-and-shoot thing, by the way. I mean, he can't just hand it to somebody else and say, here, point the pointy end at the bad guy and pull the trigger. This is
absolutely not. Yeah.
This is exclusive to him.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not something that needs to be aimed. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Now, as much as we tend to attribute Gandalf's tendency to use fire-based magia on his ring Narya, the truth is his staff seems to be the primary focus, if you will, of his magia. Now, does that mean that wizards need a staff to do any sort of magia? Honestly, that's a little bit less clear, but there is something significant about losing them. In the Two Towers, when Gandalf confronts Saruman at Orthanc, the exchange is very significant and even has ceremonial feel to it. He raised his hand and spoke slowly in a clear, cold voice. Saruman, your staff is broken. There was a crack, and the staff split asunder in Saruman's hand, and the head of it fell down at Gandalf's feet. Now, granted, we could assume that this is just some sort of formal defrocking. Maybe the staff is a symbol of Saruman's status, an indication of his rank that's being taken away from him. But it does seem to be a feat worth bragging about to Denethor later on. Gandalf tells him, Is it not to you that Theoden has fought a great battle, and that Isengard is overthrown, and that I have broken the staff of Saruman?
Yeah,
Oh,
that especially
yeah.
seems to suggest that breaking Saruman's staff is more than just a formality.
Much more.
And in fact, remember, when we see Saruman later on in the Shire, long after his staff is broken, after the
Oh,
hobbits
yeah.
have gone back home, I mean, he's reduced to nothing. He's just like this
Just
petty,
about.
vindictive shadow of his former power. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
you would almost feel sorry for him if he wasn't such a jerk.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Although,
That's about right.
even then, Frodo, being Frodo, does pity him.
Yeah, well,
Although,
yeah,
of
he's
course,
a
I
superior
guess that's
being.
a conversation. Yeah. He is. But I guess that's a conversation for another episode in a few years.
Yeah, like 5 years from now, you're right.
Yeah.
Now, Gandalf's staff also breaks in a very spectacular way on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. We talked about this recently. Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. I think we jokingly talked about activating the self-destruct feature.
Yes.
Clearly that's not exactly what happened here, but, he exercised a great deal of power. Now,
Right.
he does have a staff again when he comes back as Gandalf the White. He was sent back, as we know, naked, found by Gwaihir, and brought to Caras Galadhon, where he was healed and clothed in white. Now, either he made for himself, or maybe had made for him by Galadriel, a new staff when he was in Caras Galadhon. Now, we really don't need to wonder too much about how he got a new staff there. He got a new life. So really anything else is just details. Oh, and clothes too, for that matter.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, he got new everything. So now, as for the question of how he got it back when he escaped from Orthanc, which people do ask from time to time, I'm going to put a little spin on that, because I don't think Saruman ever took it from him, which does sound strange. But when Frodo sees Gandalf in his dream at Tom Bombadil's house, Gandalf has his staff.
That's
the text tells us the figure lifted his arms and a light flashed from the staff that he wielded. Now, that's Frodo having a dream.
True.
But if Frodo's dream is accurate, then Gandalf had the staff atop the tower. And frankly, there's no reason to believe that even though this is a dream, that it's not accurate. I mean, and in fact, that is the simplest answer to the question of why Gandalf has his staff later on.
That's true. That is true.
If we assume that Frodo's dream is not accurate, then that's when we have to start asking all these weird questions about how Gandalf gets the staff back.
Right.
Anyway, as for why Saruman didn't take Gandalf's staff from him in the first place, I don't know. Pride? Maybe a sort of a Bond villainy oversight? Like, I'm going to put you up here. I'm going to let you have your staff even. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe he had spell-proofed the roof or something. I don't know. But
he hired the people to tar it and put the shingles on it and said, don't forget, I want the spell-proof shingles.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
You got to pay extra for those, but it's worth it, especially if you're going to be imprisoning Gandalf.
If you're going to put wizards up there.
Yeah, totally.
Part of me thinks, I wonder if maybe, even as corrupt as Saruman was, I wonder if either he lacked the ability, like it literally could not be taken from him, or he actually recognized that he lacked the authority.
Interesting.
Because when Gandalf takes it from Saruman at the end and just declares, your staff is broken, he's declaring something before it actually is, and then it's made so. And he's doing so very clearly on the basis of authority.
Yeah.
One might even say capital A authority, because again, he was sent back.
Because he's sent back,
Right. So I kind of wonder if maybe Saruman, this is like one last thing where he realizes, look, I'm not going to do that. That's a step too far. I'm going to imprison him, but he is still an Astari. He's still, of my order. I don't have the authority to take that from him. I don't know.
That maybe. I don't know.
Authority or ability. That's the only thing I can think of.
That does raise a very interesting question, though. So with all that knowledge, what do we think they are then? Because that makes it sound like they are intrinsically attached to, like it's a sacred bond between wizard and staff.
Right.
And that Saruman recognizes that, even he, fallen as he is, he can't cross that line.
Right. I mean, he certainly wouldn't be able to use the staff to enhance his own power. It's, keyed to Gandalf's fingerprints.
Well, and that's just it. Yeah. I think the staffs, whatever. I think
the plural of staff.
I'm just going to start calling them Stiven.
Stiven? Okay.
I think they might be some sort of repository for their native Einiran power.
Maybe.
I have no proof of this, except for the fact that this book is ultimately about one of the Ainur putting a whole lot of his power into a physical object.
That is true. That is true.
And so I figure if Sauron can put his power into a ring, maybe the Astari can put some of their power into their staffs and then have access to that power at need. And maybe that is part of the mechanism by which the Valar limit their power in their physical bodies.
Maybe.
It's a weird thing to say because you don't want to say that they're doing something that's Sauron-like by creating these staves. But I think maybe because it's done under the authority of the Valar, it may be okay. It may not be an unnatural thing, and so doesn't have the corrupting effect that Sauron's ring does.
That totally makes sense. I mean, we come back to authority again, the idea that this is permitted by those in charge, by those who sent you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That could work. I can see that being...
That's the thing that I keep coming back to, because I've been thinking about this for a couple of years now, and that's the thing I just keep coming back to is making the most sense in terms of the way that they do seem to focus their power in some way. Mm-hmm. But like you say, it's not... Well, as much as I love the wizard face-off in the movies, there's that moment when Saruman has both staves, right?
Yeah. You have chosen the way of pain.
And he's using both of them on Gandalf at the same time. And all signs in the book seem to point to they can't really do that. The staff is an extension of their own power. They can't take it from another wizard.
It is just a walking stick if anybody else is wielding it.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, that's all it is.
Yeah. So great questions. Again, lots of people have asked it, and I've been waiting for this one for a long time because I've been thinking about this for a while.
That was a lot of fun to talk about. Thanks again to all of those who wrote in with that question. Sean, do we have time for one more?
I think we might. Yeah.
Okay.
Mainly just because it's been a really long time since we've talked about the Amazon series.
Oh, yeah, it has.
That's simply because our production schedule requires us to record episodes a few weeks in advance. And
true.
By the time, any
old
news that we'd be able to share would be old news by the time an episode comes out. So,
I haven't done that for a month, man. Yeah,
right.
That's how it works.
Yeah. But Jesse H. went back and was listening to some of our older episodes from season 1. He was listening to episodes 50 and 51. And he asked us to apply...
right.
Yeah, that's right. And he asked us to apply the Shippy test to what we might expect from the Amazon series. So we're going to do a little speculation, a little prediction on the Amazon series. And I'm going to first read Jesse's email. Jesse says, when discussing the Peter Jackson films, you used a standard put together by Shippy, if I remember rightly, that evaluates story changes made in the transition from text to film. You ask, is it necessary for the differences of storytelling methods, and does it change the core of the story? I thought this was a wise and useful way to think about these films, beyond the simple question, did I like it?
Well, yeah.
We thought so too. I was also reflecting on the upcoming Second Age Amazon series when I recently saw an Entertainment News article describing Morfydd Clark's character as a young Galadriel. Despite the relative lack of detail on the Second Age compared to the Lord of the Rings material, there's clearly room for serious misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm.
Looking ahead prospectively, rather than retrospectively like you did before, what changes to the Second Age material do you believe will be necessary for the change in medium?
Oh my.
What do you think is the core of the story, and how do you think the showrunners can avoid changing it? Finally, what changes are you afraid will come about which are unnecessary or do change the core of the story?
Oh my. Well, we could be here all night.
I love this question so much.
This is a great question.
This is
fantastic.
It's
definitely something we'll be coming back to once the show actually airs.
Yeah.
I'm not going to reveal our plans for that yet, but there will be something involved.
Yes.
Now, let's start by going back to our original Shippy test. Now, that's our term for it, not his. I don't think Tom Shippy would be quite so forward as to call it that.
To name it after himself, no.
Yeah. Now, back in episode 50, we talked about a lecture that Tom Shippy gave several years before in which he quoted Tolkien's words from letter number 210. Now, that's the letter about that terrible Zimmerman adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to try, as always, because these are Tolkien's words, not to read them in Shippy's voice, even though he also read these words.
Even though he relayed them, yeah.
Yes. The canons of narrative art in any medium cannot be wholly different, and the failure of poor films is often precisely in exaggeration and in the intrusion of unwarranted matter, owing to not perceiving where the core of the original lies.
That's right. So that's the Tolkien quote from the letter. And remember that Shippey extrapolated 2 questions from that quote.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, if the canons of narrative art are not wholly different from book to movie, well, then how different are they? And
Right.
is a change necessary or inevitable to tell that story?
Uh-huh.
And the second question is, if the adaptation misses where the core of the original lies, well, then where's the core of the original?
Right.
And how is the film's result, or in this case, the show's result, different from the book's result?
Oh, man.
Now, we asked those 2 questions in reviewing the films. So, Alan, I'm going to let you go first. With those 2 questions in mind, what predictions do you have about what the Amazon series might do? What might work and what might not?
Oh, my goodness. What predictions
And remember,
do I
this
have?
is being recorded.
Yeah, exactly. People will play this back, so I'm going to have to be
yeah.
vague. I'm going to be all Nostradamus on you and say something that'll be true no matter what, right? There have been many things happening.
If you can write it in
news.
like a Nostradamus quatrain, like...
That would be awesome, but I can't.
The show is crass. No, it's not going
No,
it's not going to be crass. I hope it's not going to be
That's
crass.
hilarious. Because then I have to find a word that rhymes with crass.
Oh, yeah,
And
no.
I don't want to have to do that, Sean. I don't.
No.
I really don't. So this is hard because you're asking us to look prospectively ahead.
Mhm.
It's so much easier to apply this test in retrospect.
It is.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to start with this idea of the canons of narrative art being completely different or not wholly different. And what changes are they going to make? Well, you have to compare changes to the existing narrative. So the first thing we have to look at is the narrative stories of the Second Age. We don't have many, but what we have are pretty dramatic, right? We have the rise of the men of Númenor. We have their capture, quote unquote, of Sauron when they come and intimidate him. We have their spread of empire.
No,
prior to
please,
that.
don't take me to Númenor.
No,
Please,
I
don't
wanna
capture
go.
me.
Don't throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have Sauron's influence over them and their eventual fall and the massive sailing to the west and the attempt to wrest immortality from the Valar.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we have some individual smaller scale tales because that's a big, large, 1,000-year tale. But we do have the tale of Eldarion and Arendis.
That's true.
Maybe compare some narrative bits to.
That's a smaller
tone
tale
and
that's
things.
told more.
Yeah, it's a much more intimate
in-depth.
story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have, the Last Alliance, right? When
Right.
when everybody comes together at the very end of the Second Age and they all combine to take the finger from Sauron. So,
They kind of combined to give Sauron the finger, too. But
well, they sure do. Well played.
yeah, I mean, there's the Galadriel and Celeborn stuff, but that's
true.
That's
I'd almost
so
forgotten
hard
about
to.
that.
But that's so hard to untangle because there's
That
so
is
many
because
different versions.
so
there.
many different versions. Exactly.
Mhm.
I mean, that changed over time, multiple
I mean,
times.
I feel like we still reference it in every other episode, but still.
We do lately, especially. And I know we
you
will
kinda have to take it
continue
with a grain
throughout
of salt. Yeah.
these next few chapters.
Yeah.
So, is there as much narrative in the Second Age as
Mhm.
there is in the first with the rest of the Silmarillion or in the third? The answer is no. So I think there's a little more room, a little more blank slate for them to do things that don't change. I don't know. Boy, that's a tough one. I'm struggling with this one.
they're really going to have to invent a lot. Yeah.
They will have to invent a lot, which is an opportunity, but also a burden because then they have to figure out where's the core of the original.
Right. So change is going to be inevitable because they have to invent a lot. And so it's going to be really, they're going to have to really walk a fine line to keep it.
No changes
to the
are
core of the
permanent,
original.
but change is.
That's right.
You knew I had to go there.
Yeah, of course you did. Of course you did. And now I've got Tom Sawyer in my head.
You're welcome. So
thank you.
The concern I have, of course, is the core of the original. That was my concern with the changes in the Hobbit films too.
Yeah.
If we're talking about going back to episode 50, 51, we understood obviously that the canons of narrative art do have to be different. They may not be wholly different, but they're also not wholly identical. As Tom Shippey said, how different are they, Professor? How different can they be? And that's a very good question. And we understood completely that certain things needed to be changed in the films in order to make them fit that medium. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the ones that miss the core of the original are the ones that are troubling. And that's going to be the concern we have going forward, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Definitely. And so that kind of echoes with some of the thoughts that I have in terms of some of the things that I'm a little concerned about. I do want to start by talking about some some things that I would be okay with, because obviously changes are going to be inevitable. I think one change that I think they probably will do, at least I've been saying they'll do this. Watch me be completely wrong. I kind of hope they'll do this. But I think one thing they're going to do that's going to be more or less necessary to make it successful is going to be tying it to the Third Age somehow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they have to.
They need to get viewers on board with this show, and they don't just want people like us. They want this to have broad mainstream appeal, and so that's.
I'm pretty sure they don't want people like us.
they might not, because
armchair critics
can be a little critical.
We can,
but they're going to really go for mainstream appeal, of course, and so they're going to need to give us characters that the average person knows and situations we recognize, and that's going to mean tying it to the Third Age. We've already heard that Galadriel is involved. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah,
fits. Yeah, and I think Jesse talked about it's Morfydd Clark, I believe, is cast as a young Galadriel. At least that's the rumor I heard.
Okay.
We've also heard rumors of Elrond possibly being involved. I'm thinking back to all the way a long time ago when they first started talking about this. People were talking about young Aragorn. My personal prediction is that we're going to see all of those, and I know I keep on saying this. It's going to sound silly someday. I think we might actually see a young Estelle growing up in Rivendell in the Third Age, and have that as sort of a frame narrative in which
like
we're learning about
stories
the second
in flashback.
Yeah, exactly. Like have young Aragorn learning about the history of his people, and then the stories are told. So that's the frame narrative for the Second Age stories. And so that gives us a way to connect the story to people who only know Aragorn and Elrond and Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings, and who don't know anything about Númenor and all that stuff. I think it'll give people sort of a window in, and I think they're going to need that. And I think something like that would be very effective, and I think it would also be in keeping with the core of the original. Tolkien loved frame narratives.
Yes, he did.
Obviously acutely aware of all of this stuff being a history for The Lord of the Rings. And so
I prefer history, feigned or real.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this stuff was the background of The Lord of the Rings. And so I think to use it in that way, I think would be very in keeping with the core of the original, and
I think
also make it very successful. So I'm totally down with that.
I hope, though, that they start with, I like that idea of a young Aragorn and the frame narrative. But if that's the case, I sure hope that they actually start with like the last moments of the Battle of Wrath and how men are involved. And that's what gets them the reward of Númenor, the reward of
that
Andor,
would be awesome.
The land of Gift. Wouldn't that be
cool?
That
would be awesome. Yeah.
Man.
And I know some people are saying that the Silmarillion is not on the table for the adaptation, but most of the people that I've spoken to say, nobody really knows what exactly
That's the thing. We don't know. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's not. I think that's. I don't know. Have you seen the contract? Because I haven't seen the contract.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, I think we're basing a lot of this on assumptions that we have about the previous movie rights that were sold when Tolkien was still alive, and what's currently in the contract with Middle Earth Enterprises and stuff like that. And that's all. That's all
out the window now.
As far as I know, it's not applicable to this situation at all, because this is a new deal.
That is correct.
So that would be something I would be quite okay with. Now, as for things that I'm nervous about.
Oh yeah, there's a much longer list, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, here's one thing that I am very concerned they're going to do, because that's just what they do is, and this is no offense to Game of Thrones, because I watched every episode of Game of Thrones multiple times. I actually enjoyed that series very much. I know you weren't into it, and I know a lot of people weren't into it. I enjoyed it. But
I don't have HBO, so it was really hard to be into it.
Well, there you go. But it's just, I don't want Tolkien's world to become like Game of Thrones. I don't want them to fill it with a lot of unnecessary adult content, a lot of sex, a lot of gratuitous violence, just to sort of HBO it up because they think that's what people want.
I don't want
a perfect example of this, I think, is the story of Ar-Pharazôn. I want to see Ar-Pharazôn's rise to power. I want to see him usurp the throne of Númenor. I want to see him be a complete scumbag, because that's who he is.
That is exactly who he is. That's right.
And I know that's going to involve Tarmiriel being married to him against her will.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I want to see that. I want to see that play out dramatically. I want to see that moment. What I don't want is I don't want to see that play out explicitly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want that. No,
I don't want to see graphic spousal abuse or worse or anything like that.
Right.
You would feel the tremors all the way from Wolvercut Cemetery here in Texas.
I think you
as
would.
Tolkien rolls over in his grave if they did that to his work.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
And yet some producer out there will probably say, well, we need that stuff to have a successful show. But I'm sorry, I disagree. I have a higher opinion of the intended audience. I think
seriously, look at the Lord of the Rings films. Look at the Lord of the Rings films.
Exactly.
I mean, yes, there was violence, but not gratuitously so, and there certainly wasn't any, sexual content, nudity. They stuck to at least that part. I mean, I may have my gripes about missing the core of the original in some things, but at least they didn't HBO it up, as you said,
right?
And they didn't need to.
No, they didn't need to because the story is worked well as it is.
That's correct.
So that's one thing that I'm concerned that they're going to do throughout. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. Now, would that change the core? And not necessarily, but it could. I mean, it certainly runs afoul of what Tolkien thought should be in stories and what should not be in stories.
That's the thing. It doesn't miss all of the core, but it does skip some pretty significant elements of the core in order to service that part of the story.
Yes, exactly.
You emphasize one thing at the cost of everything else.
Right, exactly. And that's where I think it could potentially change the core. I mean, Ar-Pharazôn, we know that he was a corrupted, depraved, horrible individual, and we need to see that. But I think that if they go too far with one particular kind of violence or one particular kind of aberration and make him some kind of like Joffrey Baratheon type figure.
Which I'm going to have to I have no idea what that
I know you didn't
means.
see Game of Thrones, but Joffrey Baratheon was the young king that everybody hated so much when he died on the show. I'm sure you've seen memes with his face on them.
I wouldn't recognize his face in a police lineup, so.
Okay, well, folks who know Game of Thrones know what that character did. And if they make him something like that and just make him sort of another insane bully who's kind of drunk on his own power, instead of what Ar-Pharazôn really was, which is somebody whose sin was pride and a failure to accept his mortal nature.
Yeah.
I think if they go too far that way, trying to kind of Game of Thrones this thing up, I think we're going to lose the core of the original there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. You focus too much on that and you miss the real nature of the fall.
Yeah, and what really is this story about? And this story is not about, just another insane bully becoming king and abusing everybody.
The second age is about fear, that fear of mortality, that fear of death.
Yeah.
It's the fear of the other. To some extent, the elves don't really, they're jealous of the men. The men are jealous of the elves. It's an us versus them. It's a cultural clash, if you will, between the mortal and the immortal. And then it's the story of pride and hubris and just total arrogance.
Yeah.
And rebellion, an unjust rebellion. This isn't like the rebellion in Star Wars, where you're rebelling against an evil empire.
Yeah.
This isn't good rebel. This is rebellion against just authority. And if we lose that, then we definitely lose the core of the original of that thread, of the Númenorian thread.
Yeah.
If they even go there.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine that we talk all this and they spend the whole time in Second Age Eriador? Well, we're going to look awfully stupid then, won't we?
It's going to be really funny if that happens. Will be. But hey,
the nice thing about Libsyn, that's our podcast host, is we can go back in and replace this episode with another one in which we skip this entire question.
With predictions of everything that actually happens. And
wouldn't that be cool? So there we go. So we'll always sound like, no, we don't do that.
That's how we're going to Nostradamus it. We're going to interpret
there you go.
Our own predictions after the fact.
If it didn't cost us $5 to archive an episode, we probably would do that. Cheapskates, man. All right.
Yep.
Folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to join us again next week when we let ourselves be blindfolded.
Nope. Can't say we will. I can't say I'm entirely comfortable with that.
I mean, truthfully, if somebody's putting a blindfold on me, there better be a whole lot more in store than a walk through the woods. Know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. And I think it's time. I think we should move along.
I think we just move right along. Now, folks, we do want to thank each of you listening, and we want to give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. To May in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, Joseph in Texas, and Kathy from North Carolina. Thank you all so very much.
Make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, and most of all, your long and sad songs, bonus if you're singing them, to barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
Barlaman is rebelling against our just authority and asking him to be punctual with the mail.
Well played, sir.
But we'll get back to you as soon as we can, and your question or comment may be featured on an upcoming show.
Or it may not. Anyway, this has been far too short a time.
It's worth a shot.
It is. It might as well. What do you got to lose, right? Well, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.